from this realm of superficiality and take the big picture in.
Okay, Randall, we're back from the Cosmic Summit. We're feeling good, as we just established, and we're looking at the big picture today of North America, and we've explored this over the last 6-7 episodes, I believe, and we've thrown a lot of, as you can say, pins on the map, and now we're going to start to draw the lines to connect them and maybe throw a couple more up there today and give people the full look at it.
We've talked about this. Do we want to move on? Which, of course, we do. I mean, there's a lot of topics to cover. But the lens that I look at it through is this. If we look at the entire time that humans have been on this earth, and it could be 180, 200,000 years now, modern humans, maybe longer, we don't know. And if we start looking at events, global change events, there's probably nothing that equals, certainly not exceeds, the events that transpired between, let's say, 11 and 14 or 15,000 years ago. We have a period of about 3,000 years or so, roughly, give or take, that just seems to have been a concentrated period of change on every conceivable level. And one of the most ubiquitous and prominent expressions of this change are these extraordinarily huge floods that are now, I mean, every month or couple of months, new studies are coming out where the effects of these gigantic mega floods are being recognized and documented. And I think it's one of the most important scientific areas of research and study of our present time. And what makes it even more doubly interesting to me is, number one, these are events that happened within the time that we modern humans have been on Earth. Let's see, let me get my calculator here. And if I go back, let's say to the Younger Dryas, I'm going to put in 12,900 years. I'm going to divide by 25 years, assuming that's roughly a generation. We're looking at about 500 generations ago. If we wanted to start counting our ancestors back about 500 generations, we would be back at the end of the Ice Age. Our ancestors of that time were cohabiting the Earth with these gigantic, extraordinary megafauna, the giant ground sloths, the mammoths, the mastodons, the dire wolves, the giant short-faced bear, the huge camels. The list goes on and on and on. All those guys that are gone now. Well, when we talk about the megafauna, of course, how do you talk about the megafauna without asking the question or addressing the question, well, what happened to them?
Where did they go?
Well, so how do you answer that? Well, one way you start answering it is you start looking at the remains, the fossilized remains of these animals, and the circumstances in which we find those animals. Now, there is a sub study or sub branch of paleontology called taphonomy. Go ahead and look it up for us, and let's get the scientific definitions. TAPHONOMY, taphonomy. And basically what it's going to tell us is it's the processes that occur to an animal when between its death and its interment into the fossil record.
Yeah. Yeah, the
Right?
scientific study of what happens to remains of organisms from the time of death to the time of discovery, particularly focusing on decay, preservation, and fossilization.
Yes. So, what are the circumstances in which the megafauna remains are found? Well, you find primarily in northern climates, you find the remains in permafrost. In lower latitudes, you find them in peat bogs, sinkholes, and most prevalently in gravel and sand deposits. Well, gravel and sand, so sinkholes can be associated with floods. Peat bogs can be associated with floods because basically, if you have a low-lying area and you have a flood and it's choked with a lot of, like, particularly organic material, and it washes in and settles into a low-lying area, later on what it does is it evolves into a peat bog, right? There's a lot of plant and organic material in a peat bog. And then gravel, well, where does gravel come? Well, gravel is almost exclusively the byproduct of water deposition, sedimentation, gravel, sand, silt, right? Well, over and over again, when you look at the findings of some bones from a mammoth or tissue or whatever, more often than not, it's going to be found in excavations in gravel pits and quarries over and over again. There's a quarry there's an excavation and the animal is found entombed within very peatified soil or gravel or sand, etc. So, in other words, the majority of the fossilized remains of extinct megafauna are found in flood deposits, to put it simply, right? So you can't really talk about the mystery of the disappearance of the great mammalian megafauna without addressing the context in which their remains are now preserved for us to find. And in virtually 90% of the cases, they're found in deposits, flood deposits. Because I'll cite an example of something that I think sheds insight into this process. In the 1980s, at the turn of the 20th century, I think the estimates were there was about 20 million elephants in Africa. Due to hunting, to attrition, to the expansion of human settlements and agriculture and those kind of things, the population of African elephants diminished to around 10 or 12 million. Well, come the 80s in Africa, you had severe droughts. Look up 1980s African droughts. And what happened is in those droughts, a lot of the watering holes that were, that the African animals would use dried up. So there was a lot of elephants. There was a huge wave of elephant mortality. Elephants going to these water holes, and they were dried up. So the elephants died of dehydration. And their carcasses were left just laying on the ground. Well, there was a group, and at some point we can do a podcast where I actually pull up the studies and we can look at the actual studies. But what they found was that an elephant, that's going to be a big specimen laying there on the ground, right? Within a year, they were pretty much scavengers and predators and microbacteria and so on had pretty much consumed the skin and the flesh, and it was basically just a large skeleton. Within 4 or 5 more years, the skeletons were gone. For whatever reason, they weathered away, they were removed, they were eaten. But the skeleton, so it took 5, 6, 7 years, and those elephants, which had died and were laying on the ground, their remains were gone. There was no remnant of them left over to find in the fossil record of the future. Unlike the death, of 11, 12, 13,000 years ago. See? So, one of the things that has to happen is the remains of an animal, once it dies, has to be removed from the processes that would consume it, which means scavengers, which would mean oxygen. That's important, being removed from oxygen, because because so it has to be an anoxic environment, because oxygen will accelerate the decay process. And now, how do you do that? Well, one of the most effective ways is to bury it rapidly and get it away from the atmosphere. And how do you do that? Well, there's nothing really more effective than a flood, a big flood, to do that.
Right.
So there's that. Then on the other hand, from all over the world, we have this tradition that's been handed down, I think, for thousands of years, about gigantic floods in the past, world-destroying floods. Now, to me, it's unfortunate that it's been reduced to this overly simplified model and looked at strictly through a religious lens or a biblical lens, and that's the view that's sort of dominated the Judeo-Christian version of the flood that we find in the Bible. But in that model, one does not need to look for actual natural processes, because it's all supernatural. And the model is that the entire world gets drowned uniformly up to the tops of the highest mountains. Now, that's completely scientifically untenable. It's impossible. It could never happen, right?
Right.
Where did the water come from? Where did the water go? On the other hand, if you have a flood that's measured in, say, hundreds of millions of cubic feet per second peak discharge, well, anybody who survived, who experienced or witnessed such event and managed to survive, their world, not the entire planet uniformly drowned, but their world would be gone.
It's completely drowned.
Completely drowned, yes. Right. And we've looked at imagery where we can see shorelines up 1,000, 1,100, 1,200 feet, 2,000 feet up on mountainsides, right? Well, if somehow you manage by the luck of the draw to be on top of one of those mountains and witness this, yeah, in the aftermath, yeah, the whole world is destroyed. You have no way of knowing what's 100 miles away, 200 miles away, much less what's on the other side of the continent, right? You're deprived of all means of communication. You're deprived of all means, for a while, of even being able to move around. You know, one of the places I take people on tours is called Steptoe Butte in eastern Washington. And it would have been above the floodwaters that would have been in that area maybe a couple of 100 feet deep. But if you manage to take refuge on the top of Steptoe Butte, which is maybe 1,200 feet, I believe, above the surrounding Palouse region that was submerged, in the aftermath of that, all you're going to see in every direction, as far as the eye can see almost, is mud. That's what you're going to see. You're going to see mud. And, you know, then you got to wait out until that mud dries out enough that you can actually walk on it. But, you know, you're walking, and if the nearest other survivors are 100 or 200 miles away, you have no way of knowing that. So that's the thing. So what has happened is, because the flood stories were seen just as myths and always over and over again interpreted. Well, if you asked anybody, scientist from 30 or 40 or 50 years ago, well, how is it that you have all these people with these flood stories? Well, here's two explanations.
From all over the world also.
All over the world, right? I think I read the quote from George Catlin at one point, didn't I?
You did, yeah. What is the quote?
The quote about 120 tribes that he visited, they all had, this is in North America, Central America, and South America. They all had traditions of great floods, and their ancestors had survived these great world-destroying floods. Now, how do you explain that?
This is what he said. Here's the quote, Randall, for the people who haven't seen the previous episodes.
I love hearing this quote.
Amongst the 120 different tribes that I have visited, I have found very few indeed who had not some tradition of a deluge. And then it cuts off. Some tradition of a deluge. And then I guess the rest of it is not available. Cuts it off whenever I look at it.
Oh, where are you looking at it at?
I'm on the Internet Archive right now.
Oh, okay.
Well, anyways, exactly
Yeah.
what you said.
So,
120 different tribes.
How do you explain that? Well, one is that I've actually seen, and these are, I'm talking about a number of decades ago. But the explanation is well, they obviously heard it from missionaries and then grafted it into their own religious worldview. Well, wait a second. 120 tribes, a lot of those tribes, he was the first white man that they had seen. Right? And so some missionary comes there who barely knows their language, if at all. They don't know his language. But he's enabled to convey to them this story of a great flood that makes such an impression upon them that they then incorporate that into their own religious traditions. I just find that whole explanation completely implausible. The other way to get around it is to say, well, it is just an exaggeration of a local or a regional flood that in its perpetual telling grew, way beyond the original. So it was through the telling and retelling, the magnitude of this flood became exaggerated. Well, I don't buy that either.
It just builds and builds and builds over the years is what they're saying.
Right. And so if those aren't the two explanations, what's left? Well, what's left is what we now know from the science of paleohydrology.
There was a huge flood.
There have been really big floods. Really big ones.
And you mentioned, we were talking about the megafauna earlier as another piece of evidence. What is the common narrative that scientists paint of what happened to the megafauna?
Well, for a long time, it was two things. It would have been the dominant idea since the 60s and the work of Paul C. Martin was the overkill hypothesis. Now, that extended mostly just to the extirpation of the mammoths.
Yeah.
But when we figured that there was somewhere around 100 other megafaunal species that went extinct at the end of the last ice age, well, did hunters, Paleo-Indian hunters, also exterminate the cave bears? Did they exterminate the dire wolves? Did they exterminate the giant camels? Did they just exterminate the glyptodonts? Did they exterminate, the American Pleistocene lion? Did they exterminate the giant short-faced bear? On and on and on and on and on and on and on. Well, to me, that's... Did they hunt these animals? Sure. Yeah. So at one point...
But over 1,000 years, they've killed all of them?
Yeah. As we've discussed this and made this point, I remember reading a book, Lost America, by anthropologist Frank C. Hibben. And in there he talks about the evidence at this point. It was written actually in the 40s. I don't think it's changed too much since then. The idea of how many creatures. Sorry, got to turn my phone off here. How many mammoths were there in the world at the peak of during the last late Pleistocene? How many? Well, his estimates were maybe 10 million, 12 million.
Wow.
Maybe that many. We know there was 20 million estimates of African elephants. That doesn't include the Indian elephant, which is really in a way a different species of elephant altogether. So then I thought, okay, let's go with the number 10 or 12 million mammoths. This would have been in North America. This would have been Siberia, Eurasia. They were especially prolific in the now drowned Beringia land bridge that connected Alaska to Siberia. Okay, so then I'm like, okay, what was the population the human population of the world back then. And I came up with several different estimates from different studies that have been made, and they range from 5 to 10 million people. Okay, let's take the bigger of the two numbers, 10 million people, 10 million mammoths. Okay, so now of those people, we're assuming that little kids aren't out there hunting. The women aren't hunting for the most part. The elderly are not hunting. So you probably got young men, older teenagers up to, 30 or 40 years old. Lifespans were not considered to be, lifespans were considered to be, mid-30s back then. So, how many hunters did you have worldwide? If the population was 10 million, how many of those people are actually hunting? Maybe a couple of million, generously?
Yeah.
Okay, so that means that if you're going to, you could work out the numbers. If you got 1,000 years, even 2,000 years, you've got to exterminate 10 million mammoths. Well, you got to bear in mind, too, that you can kill a mammoth, let's say here, but over there, 10 miles away, there's a mammoth being born. Right? It just doesn't make sense that you would be able to kill off every single viable mammoth capable of perpetuating itself within a couple of thousand years.
Yeah.
That just doesn't make sense.
No,
and it doesn't address the extinction of all those other species. So that's the overkill hypothesis. And the very first time I ever read about that, way back in the 70s, I thought, this doesn't make sense. I didn't know any of the specifics, but it just never made sense to me.
Yeah, and you made a good point too, that if it was just a bunch of overkill, then all of the fossils, skeletons would have been, there would be no evidence of megafauna because they
Correct.
wouldn't have been buried under sediment and been preserved by the impact of a flood.
Yes. So, in so many ways, the flood, I think, is of the utmost importance in understanding our own past. And it's and of course, the floods. How do we explain the floods? Well, I think there's three major agencies by which we could have mega floods. One, and this I think is the dominant one, is extremely fast, catastrophic glacial melting on a large scale. And remember the number. How much volume of glacial ice at its peak, the LGM, the late glacial maximum, about 6 million cubic miles. And one of the things I've done on several of the tours we've done is I'll look on a map and we'll try to get on a high hill where we can look off and there's a building or some trees or another hill that's about a mile away. And I said, okay, we're standing here. I want you to look at that. That's a mile away over there. Let's look to our right and find something that's a mile away. And then a mile over our head. Now let's imagine an ice cube that's a cubic mile. That's a lot of water, isn't it? Now, what if all of a sudden we could instantaneously convert that cubic mile ice cube into water? Well, that would be one hell of a big flood, wouldn't it?
Right.
But we're talking about 6 million of those that were sitting up on the earth on the continental land masses of North America and Europe, Eurasia primarily, and it's gone now. It's gone. So how did it go? It melted away. Well, if it melts and it takes 50 or 100,000 years to melt away, well, that's one thing. But if it takes a few thousand years, 3, 4, 5,000 years, that's something completely different. Now, the general melting is considered to be over a span of about 8 to 10,000 years. And I agree with that. But here's the thing. You're not going to get rid of that much ice in a uniform melting of 6 million cubic miles of ice in 8,000 years. Now, what it is looking like is that within that 8 or 9 or 10,000 years, there's at least 2, maybe 3 pulses of orders of magnitude acceleration of the melting rate. So, yes, from the very first discharge from the late glacial maximum, let's say that's 15 or 16,000 years ago, to the final melting away of the residual ice 6 to 7,000 years ago, right? And we know that for a number of reasons, which we don't get into, but one of the main reasons is when we look at sea level rise, because there's a direct relationship between ice melting and sea level rising. When did sea levels reach their modern level? Well, around 6 to 7,000 years ago. So that's a pretty good indication that that was the final melting of the residual ice. Now,
so how much has the sea level changed in the last 6 to 7,000 years? You're saying it's relatively the same.
What it did was it overshot the current level by 4 or 5 feet during the climatic optimum. In other words, glacial ice, there was less glacial ice 7, 8, 9,000 years ago than there is now. That resulted in the period from about 6 to 8,000 years ago, sea levels were 3, 4, 5 feet higher than now. Then they rapidly dropped, and they've been oscillating up a foot or down a foot basically for the last 5 or 6,000 years. Now,
and why did they rapidly drop?
Well, they would have rapidly dropped because the climate got colder. When
it
the
froze.
Climate got colder, the ice on the land grew. In fact, it depends on where you were in the world, but between roughly 5,000 and 6,000 years ago, there was a climatic transition from the post-glacial climatic optimum, which was warmer than now, into the neo-glaciation period. If you want to look at it in cosmic terms, the vernal equinox, about the time the vernal equinox was moving into Taurus, the constellation of the Bull, there was a climate change, and that climate change resulted in cooling of the global climate and an expansion of the glaciers. So as the glaciers expanded, sea levels dropped. So during the climatic optimum, the latter phases of the climatic optimum, sea levels were higher. With the onset of the neoglaciation, they dropped maybe a foot or 2 feet lower than now. And then as we moved into the Little Ice Age, see, we were in the Little Ice Age from, the mid-1800s back to the early 1300s. Well, what happened during the Little Ice Age is that worldwide glaciers swelled. They grew, right? They grew. And if you look at the evidence of the footprints of glaciers in the landscape, what you see is like terminal moraines of the Little Ice Age, where show that those were probably the largest that the glaciers had been worldwide since the end of the Great Ice Age. So again, this is something that's never explained or talked about in the global warming hysteria, which is that when we look at the baseline from which we're talking about sea level rise, when we're talking about temperature rise, we're looking at the end of the Little Ice Age. Well, the Little Ice Age had some of the coldest temperatures of the last 10,000 years. So if that's your baseline, yeah, obviously a return to pre-Little Ice Age temperatures is going to be an upward curve, isn't it? And that's what we're seeing. Now, you add in the urban heat island effect because during the climatic optimum, you didn't have huge urban areas all over the planet like you do now. But when the early data is coming in from average temperatures, like in the early 20th century, or mainly like just in the around the time just pre-Second World War, post-Second World War, excuse me, most of the data is coming from climate sensors that are at airports. Those airports are mostly rural. Back in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s, those airports were rural. Now what happens when urban infrastructure swallows up those airports? Well, now it's surrounded by buildings, concrete, pavement, air conditioning condenser units that are extruding heat. The urban areas, it's well known, and we should actually do a podcast addressed to this issue of the urban heat island effect, because again, that's being ignored for the most part. But what it shows us is that typically, if you take your average daily temperatures in the urban areas, and then you go 20, 30 miles out into a rural area, there can be as much as 3, 4, or 5 degrees Fahrenheit difference in temperatures, where the cities are warmer than the rural countrysides. This is well established. We could do it. I think it would be very instructive to look at that, look at the evidence and the data and the science, because a lot of cities now are actually, for example, New York City has a major program to ameliorate the effects of urban heat islands. For example, making sure that roofs are white rather than dark, planting trees and more vegetation, that kind of thing.
Gotcha.
So it's a real issue. It's not just something that climate deniers are saying. It's real. Now,
oh, yeah.
If you've got a bunch of data that has not adjusted for the urban heat island effect, of course, yeah, it's going to look several degrees warmer. You have an airport, and you look at data from the 1940s, and then you look at the data from now, but then that airport was more or less rural back then, and now it's surrounded by urban infrastructure. Well, yeah, that data is going to be warmer. It's going to show 2 or 3 degrees warmer, and that needs to be adjusted for. And while it's said that it was claimed that was being adjusted, again, we'll save this for another podcast, but it's shown that was just an assumption, in effect, that was being accounted for in the computer models that are being used to predict catastrophic global warming. You know, when you look at that hockey stick curve, that, you know, here it is, nice and
then,
level.
Boom, look at us. We're causing all of this.
Boom, yeah. We can take that apart. I think that would be immensely instructive to really deconstruct the whole narrative at this point, because if the Democrats get back in power, they will be pushing that, and they want to see hundreds of billions of dollars going to remediation of a problem that doesn't exist. So anyways, yeah, you got a comment, a thought?
Yeah. I was just going to say, so we're looking at the picture being connected about, well, I kind of want to bring us back to looking at the evidence in North America of these cataclysms. And we looked at a series of different floods up in the Northwest. We looked at evidence of the Bonneville Flood with peak discharges of 40 million cubic feet of water per second. We looked at the Missoula Flood, which is evidence of 700 million cubic feet of water per second. We looked in the Northeast, and we looked in the Great Lakes area, and you showed a diagram on one of our podcasts where you had a series of different potential different arrows pointing to other areas of flood evidence, and we've touched on a couple of those. But for the people who haven't tuned into this, I think this will be a good episode where we connect everything. What are all the different floods and areas that you look at for North America for evidence of this cataclysmic event?
Yeah, great question. Well, one of the things I would like to open people's eyes to is that we started out looking like at the Pacific Northwest. When you mentioned flood peak discharges up there of 700 million cubic feet per second. Well, I mean, the effects of a flow like that magnitude are just spectacular. And even to the untrained eye, it's obvious that something extraordinary happened, to create, when you don't have a flow of, millions of cubic feet per second that doesn't leave very obvious evidence in the landscape, right? So I think what we'll do is I will share a screen just to remind people, revisit this very quickly. We've looked at this graphic, and I just took a map of North America, and I showed the Cordilleran ice sheet and the Laurentide ice sheet. And you can see at the southern margin there are
We can't see the screen right now.
Right? You've seen this, right?
We can't see the screen right now, but yeah, I have.
Oh, well, doggone it. We better fix that. We can fix that.
There it is. Yep, we got it.
Okay, so this is what people should try to remember when we're talking about North America. Here's the Laurentide, which was the big one, which is actually larger than the Antarctic ice sheet that now covers the South Pole. The Cordilleran ice sheet is roughly the mass, maybe even a little bit larger than the one that now covers Greenland, which you can see up here. So Greenland has retained essentially its late Pleistocene ice, most of it. Of course, it was much bigger during the Ice Age. But so in talking about what can cause megafloods, and I said there were three possible agencies. One is rapidly accelerated melting of the glacial ice. Two would be prolonged extreme torrential rainfall. And I directly would connect that with the rapid melting of the ice sheet. Because the rapid melting of the ice sheet implies that there are enormous inputs of energy. Because you're not going to just melt, thousands of cubic miles of glacial ice suddenly without some kind of an energy input. And those energy inputs go beyond what we would consider normally available now, the way in our present climatic regime. The third would be oceanic, and primarily in the form of tsunamis. Mm-hmm. And if we were to look at the global map during the late glacial maximum, when sea levels are 400 feet lower, you've got all of these shallow coastal shelves around the continents. Well, if there's something, whether it's a subterranean, whether it's an earthquake, a subterranean landslide, or even more likely, a bolide impact, asteroid or comet impact into the ocean, you're going to have huge tsunamis generated. Those tsunamis, when they make landfall, they're going to move in. They're going to move inland, right? And we talked about this, but it doesn't hurt to reiterate it. If you've got a steep terrain near the coastline, your run-up height, let's say, is 100 feet. I think in places some of the Indonesian earthquake tsunami of the early 2000s was, I think, between 50 and 70 feet, the run-up height. Well, yep. Then you have the run-in height, or the run-in distance. So if it's a steep coastline, your run-up might be 50 feet, but your run-in is going to be obstructed by the angle, the gradient of the terrain. On the other hand, if you've got a very shallow terrain, that 50-foot run up translates into a much more distant run in, right? So if you can picture, you've got these shallow shelves around the continents, which are probably going to be the prime habitable real estate during the late glacial maximum along the coastlines, because the proximity to the ocean is going to help to ameliorate the weather extremes that we know are documented along with the ice ages. It's going to give you access to shallow marine ecologies for fishing and so on. It's probably going to be a lot of game, right? And also along river valleys, right? So if you suddenly found yourself transported back, Beckett, in a time machine to the late glacial maximum,
Okay.
you would probably migrate to the ocean. And ideally, you might go where a river drains into the ocean, because now you're going to have freshwater fish, you're going to have fresh water, right? Perhaps potable. It might be glacial meltwater, and a lot of glacial meltwater is perfectly drinkable. And in fact, because of its mineral content, it actually in some cases may be very healthful. But there would be advantages to, that would be almost the ideal place to establish a settlement, a village, whatever, right, along the coastline where a river comes in. Well, now you get the glacial melting.
Yeah, you're the most exposed in that location.
That is not going to be a good place to be.
Oh, the worst.
Now, if you have a tsunami coming in, well, yeah, it's going to wipe out any settlements along the coastline. They're gone. There's going to be no trace of them in a normal tsunami. Now, we can go over and we can look, and one of the, at the Cosmic Summit, Dallas Abbott was there. Dr. Dallas Abbott, who is one of the leading authorities who's been studying the evidence for huge tsunamis around the world coastlines. And one of the places in southern Madagascar, there was a tsunami that would have been at least 600 feet in its run-up height and maybe 25 miles inland on its run-in height. Now, this is dated, I think the latest dating is about 6,000 to 7,000 years ago. Dallas has agreed to do to be on the podcast, so maybe this is one that you could host, and then Dallas and I could have an interesting conversation.
Yeah.
If I were to open, if I were to open Google Earth and go to Madagascar, I think I'll do that just for.
Yeah. No, I can pull up. I think I know exactly what you're about to pull up.
Go ahead. Let's see whoever pulls it up first. These are chevrons that you see here. So what you have here is a bimodal depositional process where the run-in washes this stuff up. And notice how here on the distal end, there's a lot more sand, right? Well, that makes sense because as this wave is moving inland, it's losing energy, right? Well, as it loses energy, again, we've talked about this. When you've got water flow and it's got entrained sediment, and that water flow slows down, it loses its competency to transport sediment. So what does it do first? It will start depositing the larger sediment that it's carrying, the boulders, the rocks, the gravel. And as it continues to slow down, the sediment deposition will get finer and finer. And that's why at the end here you have a lot of sand.
Yeah.
But we can go up here. Now, this unique chevron, if it was a single direction, what you would have would be sub-parallel current ripples, meaning that they're not quite, they're not like perfect lines parallel, but they might be, have curves that they're going to be irregular because it's nature. It's not, right? But here's what you got to picture here is you've got the run in. So you got this big wave coming up. It stops right about up here, right? And then it reverses and flows back out. So you've got, it comes up, it's slowing down, it starts depositing material, it reverses current, flows back out, and what might be not quite parallel ripples turn into chevrons. That's what you're seeing here.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you can see a lot of sand here. Now, when you have a big tsunami like this, it's oftentimes not just one wave. It's a succession of waves of diminishing magnitude. So it looks like that you had a secondary wave, maybe even a tertiary, that came ashore but it didn't have the magnitude of the initial wave. And so it came in and deposited this sand here. This may have been a third. And look down here, you can see the ripples. Now this is what we would call, let's see if I can zoom in. This is what you would call
parallel.
Sub-parallel. Right? They're more or less parallel, but they're not like nice, evenly straight lines or anything. So you can add this as a new term to your vocabulary back at this. They're sub-parallel. And this is probably because the velocity of this draining back into the ocean, the power of this water is much diminished compared to this here.
Yeah, because at that scale, they're practically parallel as well.
Yes. Yes. Now let's see here.
Okay.
I'm looking at, so let's see, elevation. That's 115. Let me see. I'm going to zoom out because.
So this is very interesting because I think this was in the third episode, the first mega flood episode we ever did. This was the first site that we looked at. We looked at this site in Madagascar. So
yeah.
I have a question for you, Randall. As you're pulling that up, do we find chevrons like this in North America of tsunamis that come from tsunamis like this?
They're not as obvious, but I'm going to show you an interesting example here in a minute. Before we do this, I don't think we covered this when we first looked at this, but what I want you to do is notice here. Now, we just looked at this tsunami deposit here. Now we're going to come down and we're going to look at this one here.
Yeah.
And as we zoom in, I want you to notice that there's an escarpment. You see this escarpment along here? It's a cliff. That cliff is about 500 feet high. Right? Do you see that, what I'm talking about there?
I do, yeah.
That's a cliff. Okay, so now here, this tsunami wave washes ashore. You can see, look here. Here's its run in. Look at this. And you can follow it right up to its distal end, and it's almost all sand up here, right? But you also can see chevrons up here, and you can follow the outlines of the deposit. It's very obvious, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
Okay, well, here's the thing you got to bear in mind. This wave, when it washed ashore, was high enough that it overtopped this 500-foot high cliff. We can gauge from that the elevation of this area above sea level, that this wave had to have been a minimum of 600 feet high when it made landfall. I want you to just think about that for a minute. Can you imagine a 600-foot wave? No, it's almost.
I can't.
Right here. It's right here. The proof that such things have happened, and this isn't super long ago. This is probably between 5,000 and 7,000 years ago. And then you can see this would have been most likely the secondary wave that came in with less force. You can see the chevrons down here, right? Or it could have been a later tsunami.
Given the direction of these waves, the way that they seem to be flowing in, the bolide probably would have come in at some type of angle. I'm not going to say parallel to the, I guess it'd be the southwest coast of Madagascar, but yeah. You're looking at
appears to be a 20-mile wide crater on the bottom of the Indian Ocean. It's called the Burkle crater after scientist Burkle. It's right in this area. So the wave would have come up this way. It would have refracted around the southern coast of Madagascar, and that's almost certainly what did this. An asteroid or cometary impact into the Indian Ocean generated huge tsunami waves, When it hit here, like I said, it refracted around this way. And there are also on the coastlines of Australia, they're not the same magnitude, but there is, there is evidence.
Yeah, there it is.
Of, is this? Yeah, there's definitely evidence of large tsunamis hitting the coast of Australia. And if you follow the back azimuth of the axis of the chevrons, it'll point to the same area in the Indian Ocean. Back azimuth. You know what back azimuth means?
Yes.
You know, azimuth is basically points to a point on the horizon. And then the back azimuth would tell you, if you look at a tsunami deposit and you look at the back azimuth, then that'll tell you where the source of the energy came from that yielded that. Let's see.
At the directional orientation of the wave.
Correct. It's a directional indicator. Let's see. Oh, well, yeah, here we go. Here's some stuff. Yeah. Sand deposits washed inshore. Yeah, and look, they're fainter, but you can see, if you look right in here.
Well, it'd be traveling a lot more distance to get there than
yes, right. That's right.
Madagascar.
Now, and I think we also talked about this, that if this wave is traveling north, let's swing back on around. If it's traveling north, up this way, what's going to happen is it enters the Arabian Sea. Well, it's like a funnel leading up into the Persian Gulf. And what that means is, you know, when you're at sea, you could have a huge tsunami. You're in a ship, and you're going to feel the swell of it going under you. But it's when it gets into the shallows that it begins to build up that height. Well, the same thing can happen if it gets into a narrower channel. If it's this constriction or this constriction will cause the water level to rise. Now, what's going to happen when it reaches this area up here? Well, if we look here, we'll zoom in and take a look at some of this terrain. Look at this.
A massive overwash.
Now, a lot of this is sand, but it looks like the sand is being wind blown over rippled lag deposits. That would be the byproduct of a wave overwashing this peninsula as it moves into the Persian Gulf.
Yeah, if you zoom in directly to the west of Qatar and then go south just a little bit, to a little bit to the east of that, you can see what look like yeah chevrons as well over a little bit east. Yeah.
Well, here again, this is the new term you've learned: subparallel.
Subparallel, yeah.
Yeah. Now, I'm going to zoom out. Going to rotate around to the other side of the world. Let's get back.
So now there's evidence. That's what we're looking for. As I've gone through this process with you, Randall, something that I've learned is you first need to understand what you're going to be looking for, and then you can start to explore the rest of the world. So we jump to the other side of the world to look at an example of evidence of a tsunami, a mega tsunami. We estimate 600-700 foot swells and waves there. And now we're going to look in North America.
One of the criticisms that was lobbied at Dallas Abbott's work early on was that, we find chevrons on land, so therefore they're not tsunamis. So I said, okay, where do we find chevrons on land? So I had to do a little digging, and I found the reference. And here's an example of chevrons on land. Let's zoom out so you can see where we're at.
On land, you mean inland?
Inland, yes.
Yeah.
Inland. Okay, we're back up in the region of the mega floods, right?
Yeah.
Pacific Northwest mega floods. And let me get it oriented here. Okay, so let's zoom in. This is called Quincy Basin, and it's a basin surrounded on three sides by a ridge. Like we can look here, if I zoom in, the elevation of this here is almost 1,000 feet above sea level. If I come in over here, this is, let's see here, right in here. Yeah, about 1,000. We're about 1,000 feet above sea level. Let's see. The Babcock Ridge is this in here. Let's see here. What do we got? About 1,250. So, okay, so the ridge here is about 250 feet higher than the floor of the basin out here. Now, what you had was a huge, maybe 300 million cubic feet per second discharging down this way out of Grand Coulee, created a huge fan delta right here, 1,000 square miles of this stuff. The final gasp of the flood created this meander, which is not a river, it's a long lake. Then it's spread out here, and there's a dam right here, and there's a major change in gradient from this up here, which is relatively flat, to this here, which is much steeper. And so what happens when you make this transition from a relatively flat gradient, where the water is flowing at one velocity, right here at this inflection point, it gets steeper, and the water picks up velocity and becomes a whole lot more erosive. And so if we zoom in here, look at the kind of landscape we're looking at. Look at here. Potholes. This is, if anything, is mute testimony to the power of these flows. It's these round holes that are burrowed, that are carved into the hard basalt bedrock that's formed by vorticular turbulence within the water. Okay, creating these channels. Here's a butte or a mesa. Butte and basin. This is called butte and basin topography. And this is a relic of these gigantic flows and what they do to the landscape. Now I'm going to come up here, zoom out, and let's look at what happens when this water flow comes. There's a ridge right across here, what's called an anticlinal ridge. And what happened was the main source of water went through here. Now this region across here is 9 miles wide. The water flowing over this rib was at least 200 feet deep. So picture in your mind a river 9 miles wide, 200 feet deep, and it's spilling over this rim right here, and then probably accelerating to 50 or 60 miles an hour as it rips over the landscape. Some of the water was diverted to the west. Now, we're going to zoom in here.
Aha.
Yes.
I see.
You see chevrons.
Chevrons.
Yes, look at this. Magnificent chevron array here. So what's happening? The water is moving this way. And then, yeah, look at this. So they said, one of the critics said, well, this is those chevrons along the coast are formed by wind, not water. How do we know that? Well, because we see chevrons inland.
Well, I have a question, Randall.
And what?
I have a question about
Yeah.
the direction of the chevrons.
Yes.
The direction of the chevrons would be that the wave would be coming in from west to east based on where the point is.
East to west. But here's what's going on. The water is coming in here, but it's hitting this ridge. It's called Babcock Ridge. It's hitting this ridge, which is 250 feet high.
I see.
So two things happen. Some of the water reverses direction and flows back out this way. But some of the water spills over the ridge and creates things like this. This is an extraordinary feature here. Creates finger lakes, and here, what you're seeing here is where the water is overtopping the ridge. And then it's dropping down about 800 feet to the Columbia, and it's creating these recessional cataracts, which you now know what those are. Yep. Right? So you have two of these cataracts with this, it's called a rock blade, separating the northern alcove from the southern alcove. Now, had this flow continued for another couple of days, that rock blade would have been removed, and you would have had one single large alcove here. And in fact, if it kept going, it would have eaten its way right back through that 250-foot high ridge, and you just would have had the canyon through here. And then, if you go south of here, you get to Frenchman Coulee, it's called. And this was another spillway, another spillover point. It also has a northern and a southern alcove separated by a rock blade. And again, this rock blade, couple of more days of flow, there would have been no rock blade there. If you look up to, if we go back up here to Dry Falls at Grand Coulee, right here, look, you've got a alcove here, you've got another one here, and then you've got a rock blade coming down through here, but you can see it's already starting to be destroyed. See that? Mm-hmm. So that's very typical.
There's our chevrons.
Where did you see the chevrons?
Where we were looking at earlier. I guess it's just
right. The chevrons that we were just looking at are right in here.
Right.
And so
yeah, this whole landscape. I mean, just kind of going back to your point, why we jumped over to this area is scientists said that it can only they have to be formed by wind because we find them inland. But if you look at this, they're littered all over this landscape.
Well, yeah, these were obviously created by huge volumes of flowing water.
Yes.
So, yeah, I got into a little bit of an online debate 5, 6, 7 years ago with this lady that was citing that work. She said, well, what do the real scientists say? Okay, so that was literally what she said. Here's what the real scientists say. And she cited this paper that they're attempting to debunk Dallas Abbott's work on chevrons and tsunamis. And one of their main things that they cited, because they were making the argument that they were deposited by wind, which to me is absurd. It's absurd. They have all the characteristics of what you would expect by water, the sorting of it. But the clincher is that Dr. Abbott found marine microfossils in the deposits of the. So clearly, and some of them were deep sea microfossils. So clearly they were transported. And, how do you get deep sea microfossils? Well,
You're saying in Madagascar she found them or in this area?
Oh, yeah. In Madagascar.
Right.
Deep sea microfossils. I don't know of any deep sea microfossils found here.
It wouldn't make sense if there was.
No, but you find chevrons, and they're almost precisely the same configuration. So, yeah. Then there's another point we should look at here. You can see this arc, kind of dark shadowed arc. This was a lobe of ice. And at the end of this, you have terminal moraine. And that's what all of this hummocky stuff is here. This is all the stuff that, the glacier is transporting. It can be shoveled in front of it, almost like a bulldozer. Some of it can be carried on the surface of the glacier. A lot of it can be carried within the mass of the glacier itself, right? And then you've got a picture. The living glacier has layers that are moving like a conveyor belt. So if you're standing at the snout of a glacier lobe and you're looking at it over a period of years, you're going to see that glacier ejecting bouldery, gravelly material from its snout. Depending on how long that glacier remains more or less stable at that point will determine how much that terminal moraine grows, right? But that's what we've got here. So this terminal moraine is evidence of exactly where the ice extended to. And you can see here, well, there's no farming going on the moraine. It's too bouldery, too hummocky. And then as soon as you get beyond it to what we would call the outwash plain, now you've got agriculture, right? Now there's still a lot of boulders and stuff within this, but it's still, it's farmable. That's the point. When we go up here, this is called, let's see here. This is called the Omak Plateau up here. Now, Bradley Young, myself, accompanied Jerome Lessman, and we explored this area for a week. Which was this 5-6 years ago? It was in October because I remember it was colder than shit up there. The wind was blowing. But there are drumlins all over the Omak Plateau. And you can see here, this is Omak Lake. And Omak Lake is a huge meltwater trough. You can gouged out by huge volumes of water, probably flowing under the glacier. But when you come out here, this whole landscape is drumlinized. I mean, it's got these drumlins, right? And when we come down here to this area, let's see if we can find it. Okay, here we go. I think this is it. Boulder, or is that trees? Let's see, can't tell here. Let's see. I'm going to put into search Boulder Park. That should be it right there. Oops. Boulder Park. Okay, I don't know why. Okay, Boulder Park. Boulder Park is called Boulder Park because there's thousands of huge boulders strewn over the landscape. Now these boulders, like this boulder here, is probably the size of a large house. Right? There's thousands of these all in this area. And where did they come? They didn't start out there. They ended up there. And where did they come from? Well, they came from this area up in here. They were ripped off of these cliff faces up in here. On both sides, you can find where a lot of this stuff came from. Now, how did you get it from here down to strewn all over this area? Well, again, what we have to do is we have to go back to the ice lobe that was here, and you have to picture that coming out of Canada down the trough that's now occupied by Lake Okanagan, coming down all the way down this way, and here's coming down this way under the ice, and then right in here, let's see, I should have some photographs that we took up there. Let's see, that would be interesting to look at. Let's see, should be right here.
And you took these on your, when did you take these pictures?
This would have been when we were out there with Jerome. I think it was 2016. All right, Jerome, where are those pictures?
If there's anybody watching this who's in this area, go out and take some more pictures.
Oh, yeah.
Send us what it looks like in 2025.
Okay,
Okay, we took a little break, and during the break, we were looking at the big picture of North America, and there's been a lot of questions and commentary about the Grand Canyon. And at the Cosmic Summit, a lot of people were asking Randall about it, myself, and we're going to talk about the Grand Canyon in relation to the evidence of flooding, of mega flooding in this time, and how it's connected to potentially Missoula, Bonneville, and other parts of this catastrophic event.
All right. Well, then let's do it. I'm going to share screen here, and we'll look at a Google map of Grand Canyon. Now, I'm going to zoom out, and basically, I'm going to be defining this area in here is known as the Colorado Plateau. You might pull up Colorado Plateau.
Yeah.
If we want any specifics on it, like generally how many square miles. So the Colorado Plateau, it's different than a mountain range. Why is it different? Okay, different forces. Mountain ranges are created by compression, right? So when you have two plates coming together, it causes uplift. Now, we can have anticlines, so you can have like an anticlinal mountain, which is an uplift, and a lot of the ridges that we see up in the Channel Scablands are anticlinal ridges, anticlines. And they're created by this compressional force. A syncline is the opposite of an anticline. Here's an anticline, here's a syncline. Now, if you've got, when you have deposition of sediment in water, let's say in the ocean, so if you've got limestones, if you've got beach sandstones, generally the idea is that the sediments, when they're laid down, are more or less horizontal, aren't they? And it also makes sense that the higher up you come in the sedimentary column, the younger the sediments are. Youngest sediments are going to be on top, and as you go down deeper and deeper, you're going to get to older and older sediments, right? Now, in an anticlinal uplift, what is happening, let's say we truncate that anticlinal uplift, and now what happens is at the center of that, as you move from the outside to the inside, the layers get older and older. Now, this is the anticline. If you go to the syncline, it downfolds. Now, typically, it'll fill up with sediment, right? And what's happening now is as you go towards the axis of the syncline, the layers, the strata, are getting younger, right? Now, you could have a syncline that's completely flat, right? And it could be filled all the way up to the brim with sediment. But then if you find outcrops of rock, and it could be anywhere from a few miles to several dozen miles, depending on the width, same way with the anticline. It lifts up, right? And then it can erode down to where it's really literally flat. And then you find outcrops that you can then, they'll be tilted like this, and if you draw an arc from one, you can see where it connected with the opposite side. Now you can have overthrust, which is this, where you have mountains going up like this, sliding over the top. If you look in Banff, look up Banff, B-A-N-F-F. There's beautiful examples, impressive examples of overthrust faulting that builds the mountains.
You're talking about Banff and Alberta?
Yeah. Do you see, is there thumbnails? Pull up some thumbnails and share.
Yeah.
Let's see what we got there. Any one of those. Look at the Yeah, that's a good one. You'll notice that the layers are tilted. But I'm trying to see a good example of an overthrust. I know there's... Okay, now the thing to keep in mind is when those strata were laid down, they were horizontal. You know, you didn't have the deposition like this. In the depositional environment, those strata were horizontal. Let's click through a few and look at them, and I'll comment as we look. That I've been canoeing on that lake. What the hell is the name of that lake again? That's an incredible lake. Look at the color of it.
It's beautiful.
Oh.
Just pulling up.
In fact, I was with some buddies, and there's a rushing creek coming in off the melting glaciers at the north end of the lake. And we were going to hike up along that creek, but we had to get on the opposite side of the creek, and there was a big log. Is this Moraine Lake? I believe so.
Oh, let's look.
There's a big log going across the creek. So we were going across there one at a time, and the guy in front of me, and look, down there you see some canoes. Yeah, there. Look, that's me down there in the canoe. You can see. Isn't that me there? Yeah, see, I'm...
That is. It's got to be.
Yeah.
Right here.
And what I remember about this particular day is the guy, and I won't mention any names, dumbass, he was ahead of me on the log. I'm out in the middle of the log, and this log is 2 feet thick, right? 2 feet in diameter, or at least, or maybe 18 inches. It was big enough that you could walk on it. Well, right there where you would have gotten off of the log back onto the ground, there was a branch coming up, right? So this guy hangs onto the branch and then jumps off the log down onto the ground, holding onto the branch. And when he did that, it tilted the whole log and threw me off down into the rushing creek. And that's what I remember about that day. So I was soaking wet. I remember paddling back to the south end of the lake, soaking wet. His corporal remains haven't been found yet. They're up there, up in the Creek Valley, where I disposed of them.
Yeah,
as a
after
retribution for dumping me into the... No, I didn't do that.
You're a fire.
Not
a lot of people know this about Randall, but he's a very violent man. If he gets wet, he's like a house cat.
If I get thrown into the creek.
Yeah. Here's another picture.
I'll put it this way. I was annoyed. I'm looking for some overthrust faults here. Let's see. Maybe you should just put in
Banff overthrust faults. Yeah.
Yeah. Overthrust. Put in overthrust mountains.
There we are.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. First thing to notice is the tilting. You see how they're tilted up?
Yeah.
So again, originally when they formed, those strata would have been more or less horizontal, and so you had compressional forces that caused this to upwarp, like you see here.
Here's another example.
Oh, look at that. Okay, so what does it say about that?
This is just a stock photo here.
Yeah.
Geological fold overthrust in limestone rocks is what it describes it as.
Okay.
So how is this formed? How is the overthrust formed? Is that what you just described?
Yeah.
On
let me see if I can get something here to show an example of how an overthrust would form. I'll just get 2 books here. And let's say you start getting a compressional force. Let's see here. And it starts squeezing them together, right? I should get 2 paperbacks. Okay, that compression air creates a monocline.
Yeah.
So a monocline, a single incline. Let me see, do I have another paperback here that I can use? Okay, how about this? Okay, so I got 2 books, and here would be a syncline,
Right.
right? And if you think of the pages as almost like being strata, right? And then here would be an anticline,
Anticline.
right? And then here would be an overthrust.
I see. So it's like a slip
You can
almost.
Look, there are magnificent examples of overthrust mountains up along the Canadian Rockies, and that's what I was hoping we would see a picture of. I actually have some that I've taken in Banff and Jasper, but they're in folders, and it would take too long to dig them up. Maybe for a upcoming. So I was looking for an example of where you can see.
Yeah, so what you get with that, if I'm understanding, is with that rock here, I've got 2 books here, you get that
Yes,
that
and
steep
you'll have
drop here with the
yes.
yes, like that.
And you can actually see. I mean, some of them are pretty darn incredible when you understand what you're looking at.
Here we go. Here's an interesting picture. Let me see if I can get this big enough.
Okay.
It's an overhead view. And then we'll connect this back to
to Grand Canyon.
Grand Canyon. You can kind of see the
Ooh, look at that thrust faults along the Rocky Mountain. So here that's like a bunch of them. See, that's like, that's like that would be like this. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Now, the question, of course, becomes, in my mind, is rates. How long do these things take to occur? Well, that's a whole kind of a discussion in itself, but it applies back to Grand Canyon, because here's the difference in what we're talking about here. In these mountain formations, you're noticing that in almost every case, it's not horizontal anymore, right? Because it's compressional. Now, you can have tensional forces. Actually, you can. And then that produces what are called grabens, sometimes downfault grabens, where there's forces that pull the plates apart. And then, of course, like at ridges, at plate boundaries like the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, it's being pushed apart, right? Because of the upwelling forces coming from the mantle up through the magma plumes that underlie the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. It's coming up and pushing apart. So you can also have them pulled apart, and then that creates a different situation. Again, like I said, it's called a downfaulted graben. The piece of land in between the fractures there, or the fault lines, will drop down, right? Serpent Mountain in Ohio has an annular downfaulted graben. In other words, a ring-shaped downfaulted graben. And then inside that is an uplift. It's a pretty amazing geological structure, but that was the first thing that indicated to geologists that the formation there was an impact structure that had been formed instantaneously and very violently. And then, of course, it's just mere coincidence that one of the largest serpent effigies in North America is sitting right on its rim.
Mere coincidence.
Okay, so now, in contrast to a mountain range, you have plateaus. And in plateaus, the strata is still more or less horizontal. And the forces that uplifted it are not so much horizontal as they are vertical, coming from below. The Colorado Plateau is one of the biggest, most magnificent plateaus on the planet.
It says 130,000 square miles is what it covers.
130,000 square miles. Good number to keep in mind. Now, we've done tours all over the Colorado Plateau, and some of those places that we visit are mind-boggling, because there's a whole story there. Okay, so let's go in here, and I will share screen again. Okay, so here you see Grand Canyon, and if I was going to draw, let's see, does this give me a drawing function here? I'll just do it with my cursor. Grand Canyon here, and I'm going to, like this. So this pretty much outlines the Colorado Plateau. The Colorado Plateau was uplifted, but without this compressional force. So the strata still lay more or less horizontal. Okay, how much was it uplifted? Now, up near the rim of Grand Canyon are limestones. Okay, where do limestones form? In the ocean, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Limestones are formed out of the shells of billions and billions of ocean creatures that are shelled creatures that make their shells out of calcium carbonate. And it's that calcium carbonate that comes down and lithifies into limestone. Limestones are created in generally shallow marine environments. Not too deep, because if you get too deep, then it's too deep for these creatures that make these shelves to live in. It's called the calcium compensation depth, I think is, yeah. And once you get deeper than that, the waters dissolve the shells as quick as they can make them. So there's a certain range of water depth that these, and it's generally fairly shallow. Okay, so if you've got limestones on the rim of Grand Canyon, I believe the north rim of the canyon is about 7,000 some feet above sea level.
Yeah, 5,000 to 7,000 feet, something like that.
Yeah. So that means it had to have been uplifted from the time that those limestones were created. It had to have been uplifted by 7,000 feet, basically a mile and a half. Okay. So the question is how old is the Colorado Plateau? Because clearly when it's down at sea level, you're not going to have major erosion off it. You're not going to have the ability to build a Grand Canyon. To build Grand Canyon, you have to have two things, water and gravity, right? But now, if you lift that plateau up by a mile or 2 miles, yeah, now you've got this gravity potential. And that water flowing, any water flowing off the plateau, now can become erosive and start downcutting, start incising into the rock. Mm-hmm. So there's two things to consider with Grand Canyon, and most people don't differentiate between the two things. You've got the strata that is, a couple of billion years old. Look up Grand Canyon basement rock. I think that the basement rock is going to be essentially basalts that are not going to have any organic life in them like you would find in limestones.
Mm-hmm.
Did you come up with anything?
Yeah, it says Zoroaster granite.
Okay, so granite is an igneous intrusive rock.
Yeah, Vishnu schist.
The Vishnu schist.
Schist.
Does give an age? What is the name of the granite again? The granite.
Zoroaster.
Zoroaster. Does it give an age?
1.75 to 1.84 billion years old.
Yeah,
based on radiometric dating.
I said roughly a couple of billion years old. So
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's really old. Now, as you come up through the canyon, you're going to have all these layers of rock. Each different kind of rock represents a completely different kind of depositional environment. So the Vishnu schist, what does it say about the origin of the Vishnu schist? Vishnu schist.
The rocks were originally volcanic and sedimentary rocks. Over time, they were buried, heated, metamorphosed into schist.
Yeah, schist is a metamorphic rock.
Yeah.
And then as you come up through the rock column, you've got all kinds of different rock types, rock ages, generally getting younger as you come up towards the top. So now, here's the issue. Here's the question. until the Colorado Plateau has been uplifted, you're not going to get the incision of Grand Canyon until some point. It wouldn't have to necessarily be uplifted to the extent that it is now, but it has to be uplifted. I mean, if those limestones are down at sea level, that's a depositional environment. Any uplands that are eroding are transporting their sediment down ultimately to sea level. That's ultimately where any kind of sediment is trying to get to, right? Just like off the coast of Astoria, Washington, there's a huge fan delta under the ocean, right under the Pacific Ocean, that is the material, a lot of it is the material that was carved out, quarried out, and transported through the Missoula floods. Carried the Columbia out to where the Columbia discharges into the Pacific Ocean, and there's this big fan delta there splayed out from the mouth, right? So ultimately that's where any of this water flow, any water flow going through Grand Canyon is ultimately going, used to go to the Gulf of Mexico, which you see down here, the Gulf of California, rather. Of course, now none of that water makes it there because Las Vegas is using most of it. I think by the time you get down near, I don't even know if there's any flow left from the original flow of the Colorado River. Okay, so right now you've got the San Juan River that comes up from, let's see, yeah, so here's, this would be the San Juan River here, draining the San Juan Mountains. No, that's the Amicus River. Let's see, the San Juan is over here by Pagosa Springs. Let's see, what's this river here? That's the San Juan. River. Sorry, didn't mean to confuse. So this is the this would be the Amicus. Should be the. Let's see here. Is that what it is? I think it's the Amicus River. Anyways, yeah. Or the Animas River. Okay, so you have the Animas River, the San Juan, and the San Juan is a whole watershed. And then over here, you've got the Green River, and these are all tributaries to the Colorado. So the San Juan, the Animas, the Green River are all tributaries flowing into the Colorado. Mm-hmm. And so the catchment basin of the San Juan and the Animas is taking runoff from the mountains here, the San Juan Mountains, which during glacial times there was an ice cap over this, so it melted away. So during the deglaciation phase, there was a lot of meltwater being dumped into the headwaters of the Animas River and the San Juan River. Also, the Green River. Oh, where's the Green River? I think the Green River. Yeah, here we go. There's the town of Green River.
There it is.
Yeah, so there it is right there, the Green River. Okay, so between those three rivers and the Little Colorado, those four rivers, they're collecting all of the water that precipitates out over the Colorado Plateau. Any water that doesn't evaporate, that flows down, is now being fed into the channel of the Colorado River, and the Colorado River is discharging off the plateau right here, because the whole plateau is more or less tilted towards this zone right here. Is that making sense?
Yeah.
So here's the thing. When did the Colorado Plateau uplift? Well, some of the estimates I've seen are that uplift is about 10, 12 million years old. Okay? Now, at the beginning of the uplift, obviously it's much closer to sea level, and it's higher now. And if we go north, look up, since you're looking things up, look up the Grand Staircase. And you're going to be pretty amazed at what you learn here.
Oh, yeah. I've got it here, but you're sharing. If you want me to share a picture of it, I got it.
I'll stop sharing here for
It says the Grand Staircase is a massive geological formation in the southwestern United States, a series of layered rock formations that rise into stepped cliffs stretching from the Grand Canyon in northern Arizona through southern Utah.
Mm-hmm.
It reveals an extraordinary record of Earth's geological history.
Yeah. So now, does it have any like cross-sectional diagrams?
It does.
Ah, the Grand Staircase. There it is.
Let's see. There we go.
Okay, so this would be looking east. And here, as you can see, look at all those layers, right? Now, these layers were originally put down horizontally. So now we could say that they're sub-horizontal because there's been some arc and curvature induced into during the uplift. But like this over here, all the way to the right is the rim of Grand Canyon, right there. Now, that, let's see. So if you follow that uppermost limestone layer, right there, follow it to the left and follow it along that arc, you come down there and there's a cut there, and then like there's some fault lines there, and then come up to where you see this major fault line. Stop right there. Now, look at, you've got a cliff just above it, don't you?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Now, at one time, that surface that's at the top of the cliff, those layers that you see to the left, you see kind of a pink layer at the top, right? Comes down. Those layers extended out over this all the way to the edge of Grand Canyon. Okay, then you can go up there and you'll see the White Cliffs. And then you'll see the Gray Cliffs. And then you'll see the very top, the Pink Cliffs. At one time, all of that material from the Pink Cliffs all the way to the south of Grand Canyon was rock. Now, you could not even begin eroding the Grand Canyon until all the rest of that overlying rock had been removed.
Mm-hmm.
Look at the follow the layer that is the uppermost strata of Grand Canyon at the rim. You've got that limestone, right? Now, okay, that's a limestone. Now follow that to the north. Stop. You can see there's a yellow and then kind of an orange brown, and then you can still see that limestone.
Right.
Right there. Follow that to the left, all the way down. Okay, stop right there at that, like that. Go back down where that huge, yeah, right there. Okay, so now, at one time, all of those rock layers above that limestone were sitting above and on top of the Grand Canyon. All of that rock had to be removed before you even started cutting the Grand Canyon. But that's
wow, that's a lot of rock. I mean, how deep is this? That's 12,000 feet at the top here.
So that's a mile of rock.
Yeah, so we're coming down, 9,000 feet, 8,000 feet.
Yeah, well, the rim of Grand Canyon is 7,000 feet. On the north side.
Right.
So, yeah, mile or more of rock had to be removed before you even started cutting the Grand Canyon. So now, here's where I'm coming in. You've got 10 million, 12 million years, let's say, of erosion there. Now, there's two models that, in my mind, represent the end point of a continuum. One is the geological gradualist model, that the entire canyon was cut by flows and erosional forces not really much exceeding what we see now. In other words, the modern Colorado River, eroding one grain of sand at a time through there, has slowly and uniformly carved the Grand Canyon from the top there at that limestone layer all the way down to the mile depth to the inner gorge. If we want to kind of look at the religious view, we go to the other end of the continuum, and it was all, I've heard, and I've seen, fundamentalist evangelical type Christians arguing that Grand Canyon was created in one great flood, Noah's flood. And I've even had people, who are familiar with my work, even some people who I think who were at the Cosmic Summit. Well, was it created in, and you brought it up, the issue of, well, was it created by the floods at the end of the last ice age? And my answer to that would be, well, it undoubtedly underwent accelerated erosion during the transition out of the ice age. I'll come back to why we can assume that. But the whole canyon was not cut. In fact, if what I would argue as a plausible scenario is that the canyon was uplifted. And when the transition from Pliocene to Pleistocene occurred 2.6 million years ago, something happened to the planetary climate. It became it was destabilized. It became unstable relative to what it had been in the late Pliocene. How did that instability manifest? Well, through this lurching back and forth between full glacial age, like the late glacial maximum, and the interglacial age, such as we are now blessed and privileged to occupy. Okay? So I would argue that a likely scenario is that the Colorado Plateau was uplifted, probably reached its current elevation somewhere between 2.5 and 5 or 6 million years ago. When the Pliocene-Pleistocene transition took place, and you had this major upset in the global climatic stability, you now had these transitions. What the evidence is suggesting is that most of the geomorphic work that we see preserved in the landscapes around us was created in those short-lived transitions rather than the longer periods of relative stability. Does that make sense?
It does.
There's an old saying about wartime, something like this. When you're at war, the life of a soldier is long periods of boredom interspersed with short periods of terror. I think that's kind of would describe
Earth
for the last 2.5 million years. Okay, so I would suggest that, yes, the slow, gradualistic erosion of Grand Canyon is definitely taking place and proceeding. But every 10,000 or 20,000 or 30,000 years, 100,000 years, that process is interrupted, and there are rapidly accelerated periods of erosion. And then when the transitions have finished and the climate settles out, then the erosion rates go back to what we see as the modern rates. So what I would argue is that we did look at some of the evidence that I showed you represented massive rainfall over the southwestern deserts, right? Mm-hmm. We looked at that. And then we looked at some of the evidence for the Appalachian Mountains. Did we look at some of that, right? What that showed was periods, and relatively recent periods, of extreme rainfall, right? Well, I would say that the Colorado Plateau has not been, has been subject to the same process. And you have these short-lived but extreme rainfalls from time to time. And the last time this would have happened, I would argue, was at the end of the last ice age, probably associated with meltwater pulse 1b, probably associated with the younger Dryas boundaries, both the bottom and the top, the older and the younger. And part of that is that the Colorado Plateau would have gone through a cataclysmic drenching. And with all of those 130,000 square miles of catchment basin, that's a hell of a lot of water.
Yeah.
And all of that water is being funneled down, draining off the Colorado Plateau through the Grand Canyon. So, to sum it up, I think that the model of Grand Canyon is normal rates, we call normal, which are the uniformitarian rates such as we see now, and those are interrupted periodically by massively accelerated erosional events where you have pluvial phenomena on a grand scale over the whole Colorado Plateau. So you've got the Green River catchment basin, you've got the Animas River basin, you've got the San Juan, you've got the Little Colorado. They're all converging, funneling into the Colorado, and that is then draining off the plateau through Grand Canyon. And so I would argue I would say that the downcutting of Grand Canyon is episodic or periodic. It's cyclical. And very possibly the last great erosional event is what would have carved the inner canyon, the inner channel at the very bottom of Grand Canyon. If you look at a cross section of it, you'll see it's kind of a stepped profile, and then there's a narrow, deep slot at the bottom, which is called the inner gorge. And this is pure speculation, but I would speculate that the inner gorge might be a product of the last accelerated erosional event.
And this is the inner gorge right here.
If that makes sense.
It does. It does make sense.
And I hope that clarifies it for a lot, because I've gotten that question myself a lot, and I've never gone into this length of explanation. So I think this was a very good thing to do.
Yeah, I think it is. And so now we've looked at the Northwest. Now we've looked at the Southwest, I guess you could say. And do we want to go look over at the Northeast for more evidence of this? And we can just kind of bounce around the United States. So we talked in one of. Go ahead.
Well, just say, yeah, certainly, yeah, we can do that.
Yeah, we talked in, I believe it was the last episode, about the Great Lakes. And we had talked about evidence north of the Great Lakes and south of the Great Lakes in the previous episodes. But what is let me share my screen here on Google Maps here. Where do we want to go, Randall? Where do we want to look at specifically for another piece of smoking gun evidence?
Well,
that's something isn't as uniform as the common model prefers us to believe.
Good question. Okay, so clearly I think the Great Lakes are a product of the last catastrophic meltdown, largely, right? The usual explanation is that they were pretty much 100% the product of glacial erosion. I think the term we could use now is a term we introduced in our last episode, glaciofluvial.
Mm-hmm.
So zoom in on the eastern basin of Lake Superior. And we looked at that, but yeah, go to the eastern. Now that is a bunch of canyons that are, I think, several thousand feet deep that have been gouged into the floor of Lake Superior. And that shows north to south directed massive water flows, which I would submit are probably subglacial. Okay, so then you have, if you go down there where it says you got that bridge of land separating Superior from Michigan, Lake Michigan. Mm-hmm. Okay, let's go down towards Lake Michigan and zoom in a little more. Okay, zoom in. And you can see the streamlined forms. Let's, pan upwards. Not zoom, pan. Zoom back out. Zoom out a little more. Okay, now pan south so we can look at. There we go. Keep going. Okay, stop. Zoom in. Now zoom in. And what you're going to see is the same type of erosion on the floor of Lake Michigan. And if you were to drain the water, what you would have there would be very much like the Channel Scablands. Now, if you zoom out enough in that bridge of land, you can see the towns there, Curtis, Newberry,
Yeah.
all of that. Well, that's all just glacial deposits sitting on top of bedrock. If you were to brush all that out of the way, you would have a continuous trough from eastern Lake Superior all the way down through Lake Michigan.
Interesting.
Is that making sense?
Yeah.
Pull back out, and let's take the big view again. Keep going. Stop there. Now, imagine that bridge of land is gone, right in there. That's gone. And now you would have continuous trough from there to the south end of Lake Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
And that was filled with a glacier load. And I would argue then it was subject to highly erosive subglacial floods. If you go over to Green Bay, which is right there. No, Green Bay is Lake Michigan. Come down, keep going. Okay, so you've heard of the Green Bay Packers?
Of course,
right?
I'm
The
disgusted
football
by
team.
that. Yep.
Okay, so there was a distributary trough of floodwater that carved Green Bay, and go down to the south end of Green Bay and keep going, and you'll see Lake Winnebago occupies part of that trough, that abandoned trough that was a great meltwater flood stream that was coming off. And then stop right where you were, go just southwest of Oshkosh. Okay, pan to the south so we can see down there, like where it says Beaver Dam. Keep going. Now, are you in Google Maps or Google Earth?
Google Earth.
Okay. I tell you what, I'm going to shift over. Okay, so here's Green Bay right here. So this is Green Bay itself. And this is filled with sediment, but this was one trough that came down here. And then when you get down in this area, you're getting to the area where you're getting close to the edge of the Michigan lobe of the ice sheet. And when you zoom in, what do you see?
Here we are.
A very impressive drumlin swarm.
Yes.
And you'll notice the direction. Notice the axis here is almost north-south, and then as you're going to the west, you see how it becomes more and more tilted towards the northeast?
Yes.
Why is that? Well, it's because it's coming down this trough, and then as the glacier is getting thinner, there's less overlying pressure. So now the water can spread out. And that's what we see happening there. It's coming down here, and then it gets down in this area, and the water that is channelized in that trough now can spread out. Because you're getting close to the edge of the glacier is getting thinner, the overlying pressure is less, so it's not being forced to downcut like it's doing up here when it's cutting the channel of Lake Winnebago, and so now it begins to spread out. And there's something that I should show you. Let's see if I have it here. That is quite impressive when you see it. So then it would follow, doesn't it, that water is going to discharge from the ice sheet, correct?
Correct.
Okay, where's it going? I mean, it's got to. I mean, it's moving towards the margin of the ice sheet, and then it's going to get to the edge, and it's going to outburst from under the ice, but now it's beyond the ice. It's got a free surface, right? So that's an important distinction, because it goes from having this overlying lid of perhaps thousands of feet of ice that's keeping that water under pressure. And then if you keep in mind that the source of that water, from wherever it's ultimately coming from, is constantly being replenished, and it's being fed into this plumbing system even faster than the plumbing system is able to convey the water to its discharge point. Okay, so I'm going to show you something here that's kind of mind-boggling. Okay, look at this graphic. Okay, so actually, okay, they're calling this the Green Bay lobe. So here is Green Bay. We followed this trough down, and this is showing the direction of the subglacial water flow. And these lines here also conform to the axial directions of the drumlins, right? Well, then you can see that the water, you see these hash marks around the edge of the ice sheet. These black marks?
Yes.
Every one of those represents a point where high pressurized waters gushed outburst from under the ice sheet. All right. Let's see, the Antigo. There's three of them pointed out here.
Marty, Antigo, and Bryant.
And I've got a picture from Antigo that will give you an idea of the kind of outburst discharge that's coming from each of these lines here. Each of these lines, again, represents discharge points of water that had been channeled subglacially, and now it's bursting out from the margin of the ice sheet. Okay, so now let's look at the next slide. And so here's the Antigo channel. So this was the edge of the ice sheet. It was bursting out here. And just look at the dump truck down here. And look at the cargo of sediment that was being washed through this subglacial flow here. And you've got, what is it here? Configuration of the Laurentide ice sheet lobes in Wisconsin at the end of the last ice age, showing locations of tunnel channels and drumlin topography. Approximately 70 tunnel valleys intersect the margins of the Green Bay, Wisconsin Valley and Chippewa lobes of the Laurentide ice sheet. And every one of them was a high-pressurized, high-violence outburst, as you can see right here. This is not a low-energy event that did this.
Oh.
No way. And see, that's what you got to start picturing now. You've got these subglacial flows just under extreme pressure, just bursting out. Boom, exploding out. Right? A little earlier in this episode, we looked at Boulder Park.
Yeah.
And I said, how did those get there? They got there in a process very much like what you see right here. But what you had there, we had the Okanagan lobe, the one I said had drumlins on it, and the Omak Plateau. I was going to find the pictures of that I took. Maybe we'll do that in the next episode. I was going to find the pictures when we were up in the drumlin fields. Bradley and Jerome Lessman and myself, Dr. Jerome Lessman, who is one of the leading experts on drumlins, I would say, in the world. Now that he co-authored the paper with John Shaw way back in 2001, when he was a graduate student. So Jerome Lessman, he is of the mind that the drumlins were formed by subglacial floods, which was an idea first proposed by John Shaw, but rejected by all his critics. Why? Because the scale of the drumlin fields demands that the water volumes are so extraordinary that nobody could even imagine how you would even get those volumes of water. And so his theory has been rejected. But it's the only one that makes sense if you grant the possibility of there being injections, enormous, extraordinarily enormous injections of meltwater into the subglacial system, into the subglacial environment. And there is a way we can do that. Boom. An impact onto the ice sheet will accomplish all kinds of things. And that is something that we need to break down and really unpack that as a model. Right?
Right.
So,
and not just keep I don't think you are, and a lot of the people who have large voices are happy with the common model. So the more communication there is about it, hopefully it makes its way into the academic world, or whatever form of research takes us into the next phase of the future.
Yeah, and so what I've been doing is I've been mapping using the LiDAR mapping software now to map. With LiDAR now, we have unprecedented ability to perceive drumlins that we couldn't see before. And this is a good example right here of, you can see those drumlins. And again, notice here the divergence of the drumlins. Yeah, there's drumlins all over the place. Look here. Now, when we go back to here, look at this area right here off Lake Michigan, right? This is where we're at the top end of Green Bay.
Yeah.
Now we're going to zoom in right here for the next slide, and look what you got. There's drumlins all up and down here, which means there's water, large volumes of water flowing under the glacier. Yeah, here's a close-up. So I believe that by mapping the flood pathways, the drumlin fields, the flood pathways, we can sort of reverse engineer the whole process, because this is not normal glacial melting from the margins inward. We have melting that's right up under the center of the whole frickin' ice sheet. That doesn't make any sense under a normal, just a warming climate. The model of glacier disappearance or recession during a warming climate would be its southernmost margins recede faster than its northernmost margins, and it's just shrinking back
Over time, right?
Why would you have gigantic sheet floods, pressurized sheet floods flowing under the glaciers, covering thousands of square miles? You wouldn't.
Yeah.
But look at this. See here? Again, look at the angle of the drumlins. See? Think of our chevrons the same way. You can back azimuth it, and you can come up with an epicenter. Northern sector of the drumlin swarm on the western shores of Lake Michigan in Wisconsin and upstate Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
And here's the other thing which we need to cover to have a comprehensive view, and I think one more episode where we show people the rivers of North America, and the concept of an underfit river, and see examples of it over and over again, examples, because all of this is part of putting together this big picture. See, what I would like to do once we have manifested our Cosmogonia Institute is develop a curriculum of catastrophism that you actually go and can, just like you might earn a degree in sedimentology, you earn a degree in catastrophism. So you learn about all the ways that catastrophic events manifest and all the interrelated stuff. So there would be paleohydrology, there would be impact geology, there'd be volcanism, et cetera, right? Because there is nothing like that now. Nobody is offering. This is all me and a small group of researchers going to all these different areas and pulling this stuff together. There's no one comprehensive, like you sign up and you learn all this stuff. No, you have to take a bunch of different glaciology, hydrology, sedimentology. The list goes on, right? All of this, there's many different disciplines that have to be integrated that all create this comprehensive view of catastrophism, which I believe is now critically important, because without our understanding of catastrophism, we have no way of truly and authentically understanding not only the natural history of planet Earth, but the history of rise and fall of human civilizations. And we need that. It's absolutely critical to us to have any kind of realistic expectations of how we might survive long term. Now, what's interesting about this, if you look, is that you can see there are actually drumlins on the floor of this. This is the Whitefish River, and there are actually drumlins on the floor. You can see streamlined forms up here. And, of course, again, classic case
Yeah.
of a small river flowing in a huge channel, right?
They're
Let's go,
everywhere. I mean, the
look at
underfoot
this.
rivers are everywhere throughout the
Yeah,
United
there's the
States.
whitefish. And look, you've got drumlins in here showing that initially there would have been subglacial floods flowing down here. And then there would have been dead ice. And when that dead ice melted, it left all of these ridges.
What do you mean by dead ice?
Okay, well, like I've said before, glaciers are like living things.
They're grabbing and they're melting. They're growing.
There's a zone of accumulation where the snow is falling, and it's
zone of
compressed into
ablation.
flowing glacial ice. And glaciers are living in the sense that they're dynamic, they're active. You've got layers of ice flowing, sometimes at different rates. Typically, you'll oftentimes in temperate glaciers, you'll have water flowing at the bottom. Not enough to form drumlins, but you'll still have a basal meltwater, right? Then you have a zone of ablation, and that's where the the end of the glacier is. And when a glacier is in equilibrium, the amount of accumulation equals the amount of ablation. If you have an accelerated accumulation, glaciers will grow. If you have a warming of the climate and the melting at the zone of ablation increases, the glacier will recede, right? So you can have an equilibrium, or you can have a growing glacier, or you can have a receding glacier, but it's all part of an integrated system of glaciers flowing, right? From, when I say dead glaciers, imagine that you come in, you got a big glacier there, and you come in with an atom bomb and you blow up the uppermost part of it, and it's not feeding anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And now you just got big masses of ice sitting there on the land, but they're not being replenished. There's no zone of accumulation that they're connected with anymore. That's dead ice.
Understood. Makes sense.
Also called stagnant ice. Now, there are studies that show that there were huge masses of dead ice over the North American continent during the later phases of deglaciation, which is very interesting to me. And we can talk about that at a different time and place, but that's the difference. And so somewhere in there, the whole glacier mass, both the Cordilleran and the Laurentide, were what I was calling living glaciers. And then at the end of the process, what you have instead, the living dynamic glaciers have been replaced by thousands of square miles, just huge swaths of just dead ice sitting there. Now, as the climate shifts from the cold of the Pleistocene into the warm of the Holocene, that dead ice begins to melt away. However, just like ice now starts melting in the spring, melts over the summer, and then it's interrupted by winter, and you get winter snowfall again. You've got 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 years to completely get rid of all of that dead ice. That dead ice melting, what's contributing to the final rise, maybe the last 100 feet, 150 feet of sea level rise.
I see. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So there's another picture of this. Do you want to continue in this area, or you got it in you to look at one more area?
I want to show some of the more well-known rivers, and maybe we should save that for the next episode, and then we'll cast our net further beyond North America.
Okay.
Because
all right.
What I'd like to do, and what I'm hoping, is we do this series here, it will serve as sort of a what would be the word? Not a touchstone, but as an exemplary example. Somebody says, I want to know about terminal ice age flooding. Where should I go? Let's go to the big picture. Randall and Beckett are taking it deep. They're unpacking the whole thing and trying to establish a benchmark of learning. I mean, there's a lot more to learn beyond what I've learned. But I would say at this point, my understanding of these is probably right up there on the tip of the sword. So I'm trying to get as many people to understand this as possible. And I'm not saying I have the final explanation for everything. No, not at all. What I am doing, though, is showing a lot of evidence that I have spent many decades integrating into a coherent model. And it clearly is catastrophic. So we'll look at some of this more. I mean, look at these incredible landforms here. Well, this is revealing a story to us. This is a story of phenomenal events here.
And drumlins are formed only under glaciers.
Only
correct?
Under glaciers.
Yeah.
There's a two-step process. And I'm going to stop share here for now.
If I remember correctly, it's depositional structure of sediment underneath a glacier, correct?
Think of it this way. Here comes the millions of tons of glacial ice grinding over the landscape. It pulverizes the landscape, breaks it up. As a result of that pulverizing process, you've got boulders, you've got gravel, you've got different size sediment, you've got lots of sandy and silty. It's all different stuff. No structure. It's all just mingled chaotically. You might have organic material, probably, if there were forests in the way of the transgressing glaciers, the growing glaciers, they're going to overrun the forests. They're going to be scooped up. They're going to contribute to the glacial till. There could be extinct animals within that mass of material, but it's chaotic. There's no structure to it. Now, you've got this source of meltwater, this copious amount of meltwater that has somehow accessed the bottom of the glacier. Because there's a huge volume, it's feeding into whatever access it has to the glacier bottom, and that water is now spreading out because the water is denser than the ice, isn't it? Everybody knows that. So in some cases, it may uplift part of the glacier, or what it'll do is it'll actually, and we do need to talk more about drumlins, because drumlins are one of the keys to deciphering this whole thing, can erode upward into the bottom of the glacier, right? And what it does is it creates a very distinct sort of a cup-like form that is almost like the inverse of a glacier. Now, out of the chaotic substrate of glacial till, that water under pressure will begin to take that till and reshape it. And what it does is the work of the fluvial processes will line up that material. Blunt end will be up current, and there will be a long tapered tail in the down current. If we go, to any of these things that we were looking at, and we look close at them, you'll see that there's distinct difference. The up current, blunt; down current, a long tapered tail. Right?
So how does mainstream geology and these scientists just ignore all of these drumlins, or do they have a different theory of how drumlins are formed?
Well, for years it was assumed that because glaciers always show up drumlins always show up under glaciers, that they were produced by the glaciers themselves. Where it has evolved to now is glaciofluvial. In my mind, imprecise way, it's the combination of the glaciers and flowing water that create the drumlins, but not on the kind of cataclysmic scale that is implied by the work of John Shaw. John Shaw was basically saying that these are huge catastrophic flows. And some of these flows were so huge, like what he calls the Livingstone Lake event, that in his estimate, it was the total flow was 84 84,000 cubic kilometers of water subglacially. And let's see, 84,000. So
Wow.
a cubic mile of water, and I'm going to divide that by, okay, so there's about, let's see, divide by 280. Okay, so there's just a little over 4 cubic kilometers in a cubic mile. So if we take 84,000, divide it by 4, that's like 20,000 cubic miles of water, creating one drumlin field.
Yeah.
And that was just too much. They couldn't, nobody wanted
They
to.
can't wrap their head around it. It doesn't fit in the box.
No, they can't wrap their head around it. Right. 20,000 cubic miles of water. Now, one filling of Lake Missoula is 600 miles. So if we go cubic miles, so we divide this by 600, that's the equivalent of over 30 Lake Missoulas, all draining at once under the ice sheet. That was rejected, even though all of the evidence is consistent with water flow being the shaping agent, even because there's internal structure in a lot of the drumlins. And that's water. It's water that will sort and create an internal architecture. But it's been rejected. John Shaw's work has been rejected. And I could pull up what the critics said, and basically they said, well, and John Shaw himself imagined that there had to have been a reservoir. And somehow this reservoir forms and then discharges below the ice. So there's 3 possibilities. The reservoir forms on top of the ice. And we know that during spring and summer, large amounts of water can pool up on top of the glaciers. Typically what happens, though, you don't get anywhere near 20,000 cubic miles of water. You know, you might get a fraction of a cubic mile of water, and then it will find its way into some aperture, a fracture or fissure or a moulin, it's called, in the glacier itself. And typically what you'll see, and again, we have the studies, we can go through these studies. What they've done, glaciologists have gone up there and there's a pool of meltwater on the surface of the glacier. They'll add dye to it. And then one day they come and the pool of water is gone because all of a sudden it's found some hole, crack in the glacier, and boom, down it goes. And then at the snout of the glacier, they'll see the dyed water discharging. So now they can go, okay, that took 1 week from here to the snout, or 2 weeks from here to the snout. And it discharges. But the volumes of that discharge are minuscule relative to the volumes necessary for creating drumlin fields. So supraglacial on top of the glacier. Englacial, E-N glacial, within the glacier. Subglacial beneath the glacier. Mm-hmm. So the critics said, no, there ain't no way you're going to get that volume of water sitting on top. There ain't no way you're going to get it within the glacier for the same reasons you're not going to get it on top. And at the bottom, you're not going to get it either because the water, we know, for example, when you have a volcanic eruption under the ice cap up on Iceland, it'll create maybe a half a cubic mile of water, something like that. And it will flow subglacially from the buried subglacial volcano out to the snout, usually within 2 to 3 weeks, and then it discharges. But again, the volumes are locally catastrophic, but again, not even close to the volumes that would be required for drumlins. So the catastrophic subglacial flow as the origin of drumlins has not been accepted by the geological community because they looked at superglacial, endglacial, subglacial, and said, none of that works. Well, they're assuming that you have the formation of this reservoir first. Then the reservoir drains out. And I'm saying, well, no, there's one consideration that you've overlooked, and it's because it's not within your uniformitarian models of global change, and that is an instantaneous cataclysmic melting of ice. No reservoir needed.
Just melting rapidly.
Just rapid melting. In a scenario that requires rapid melting, enough fracturing of the ice that huge volumes of meltwater can easily access the bottom of the ice. You would also have the potential, and I think we have to add in, because what the glacial, unglaciated evidence shows us from, say, the southwest, the south, the southeast, is not direct glacial melt, but prolonged torrential rainfall. Now, one of the papers I've just read from Dallas Abbott, where she's talking about oceanic impacts, right? Now there's a whole new level of research being done on oceanic impacts. Still very little work done on glacial impacts.
Impacts, right.
But in the scenarios of oceanic impact, you've got, of course, the creation of this temporary crater called a transient crater that rapidly collapses on itself because it's water, right? Then you have the generation of huge tsunami waves from that impact point. But the other thing that you have, and Dr. Abbott acknowledges this and even mentions this in the paper, you're going to have this gigantic injection of water vapor into the atmosphere. And in her models, the rainout might take 2 to 3 weeks. But that's rainout where you've got torrential precipitation nonstop over several weeks, and I think that's exactly what we've seen in the southwestern deserts and in the southern Appalachian Mountains. When we see boulders the size of SUVs stacked up on top of each other, when we see those huge potholes drilled into the bedrock, those are not byproducts of the modern flow regimes in those areas. And since that was not part of the glaciated terrain, it had to be rainfall. And that would fit the model of an impact into an ice sheet. Just as it fits right? Because an impact into an ice sheet, it can be treated in some ways. It's going to have its correspondences to an impact into the ocean. Because it doesn't matter that it's ice. The tremendous temperatures of an impact are going to instantly vaporize huge amounts of glacial ice. That water is going to be injected into the atmosphere. That's going to begin circulating around. It's also going to rain out right back on the ice sheet itself. And there's going to be a lot of superglacial flow. There's going to be superglacial flow. There's going to be vapor injection and rain out, and there's going to be subglacial flow.
So there's a massive pluvial and fluvial events going on simultaneously. Simultaneous,
yes. Now, see, that's a catastrophic model, and I think that what's going to happen is the efforts to explain all of this stuff by gradualist models are going to become more and more strained, more and more complex, and to try to, if we can just let go of the gradualist model and accept, well, maybe there have been in recent geological history really big catastrophes, and some of those catastrophes involved impacts. And another thing we'll talk about in another episode is the role of the sun.
That'll be an interesting
mass ejections and solar storms, which interestingly seem to be connected with the larger picture. Because I think the model that we're ultimately moving towards here is we're not, and see, a lot of the critics of the Younger Dryas impact, they had this stripped down, oversimplified model. And their criticisms were basically, oh, well, the kind of energy that you're invoking here would be, what was it, a 4-kilometer asteroid coming in, and there was, we can go through, we should go through, too, the criticisms of the Younger Dryas impact. But where the starting point is why I think those criticisms fall far short of debunking the Younger Dryas impact, is their models are oversimplified, right? They're assuming one object hitting the Earth randomly, and I don't think that's what the evidence shows. I think what the evidence shows is that it was a multi-impact event. There may have even been several episodes of impact between 14,600, say, and 11,600. We've seen the proxies at the Younger Dryas, lower Younger Dryas boundary. What happened at the top of the Younger Dryas? Because there was a warming spasm that was just as severe as the one at the bottom that preceded the return to full glacial cold. So I think what we have to do is revise our models of impact geology and understand that multi-impact events are actually way more common than we had assumed a few decades ago. And I think once we can get that and start looking at it, I think we can use drumlins and some of these subglacial features to reverse the path of the floodwaters and converge in on radial meltwater epicenters, which to me would be how you would go about finding an impact site on the ice sheet. And then
Very interesting.
where we're going to go with this is we're going to ultimately we're going to transcend the Earth, because I think we're looking at what we're seeing here. See, and still, even amongst some of the Comet research team, the thinking is we're seeing something that's pretty much exclusively affecting the Earth. I think we got to go beyond that. I think we're looking at an event that affected the entire solar system, including the sun. So maybe we should leave it there, and we'll pick up this conversation very soon and continue.
We will. We will. And just final show notes. You just did a talk about this where you went deeper at the Cosmic Summit. If anybody watching wants to watch that talk, you can go to cosmicsummit.com, and the virtual pass is still available for you to purchase. These aren't going to be released in full online, so you'll have to go to Cosmic Summit to see that. And you mentioned the Comet Research Group. We're talking about getting Alan West to come on and talk to us as well.
Yeah.
The Comet Research Group also just launched a fundraising campaign because they have a series of different projects that they're working on. If you go to cometresearchgroup.org, they've got a GoFundMe page that explains a lot more on what they're working on. Donate to them. They're doing a lot of this work. Any other show notes? What else do you have coming up, Randall?
I don't really have... I'm not traveling anywhere in the next month or two. I've been on the road so much.
We're in put.
Yeah, I'm going to stay put for a month or two and try to get some work done in the studio here. Create a bunch of new content. I've got a lot of raw material that I want to create new content. And I think you and I are going to be collaborating on some of this, because what I would like to do is, I think we can, with AI and what I've seen now and what you've shown me, I think we can create some interesting animations of some of this stuff.
Definitely.
I think we can do that and bring that to the table. And at this point, unless there's somebody in the Comet Research Group specifically looking at the paleohydrology side of the spectrum, I don't see anybody in there that has focused on, one of the main criticisms, one of the main attacks of the critics as well. The smoking gun would be the crater. You haven't produced a crater. Remember all the hoopla over, the crater, what was the name of it in Greenland? You know what I'm talking about.
I do, yeah.
Hiawatha. That was it, wasn't it? Hiawatha. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. Okay.
It was a large crater under the ice. Its age could be younger, but it's controversial. I'm inclined to think it's probably not Younger Dryas. I kind of didn't think that right from the beginning. But remember, there was a lot of hoopla about that. We might have found it, here it is, and blah. And then some of the evidence came in suggesting that it was older, and then the critics
Yeah.
were like, "Aha! See, we told you
Told
so."
ya. I remember.
Yeah. Well, again, I'm thinking what needs to happen is, okay, in the ocean, it's going to generate tsunamis, right? But it's not going to leave any obvious evidence like a big crater in the ground. But if it hits the ice sheet, same thing. We can't look for a classic crater, because let's say that the bolide impact is energetic enough that not only fractures all the way to bedrock, the bottom of the glacier, but also fractures the bedrock itself. Well, that's where I think we need to be looking at, because I actually think we can identify 12 impact sites.
Ooh. Okay, there's a little tease for people, but we'll keep it on show notes for now because we'll get a lot more content. I guess the last show note that we have is related to Cosmogonia. So you all are going to see a link in the description of this video. You guys may have heard us talk about Cosmogonia, a project that Randall has been creating for many years. And we're actually opening up the email list for it, where you'll be able to get early access to some announcements around it, the opportunity to contribute to the project in a lot of different ways. Not a lot is ready to sink your teeth into as far as digital experiences or in person, but we're going to open up the email list for you guys to be able to get first updates. So if you're interested in Cosmogonia and learning more about the project, click the link, give us your email, and you'll be the first to know. And that's pretty much all I got for today.
Me too. I'm a little hoarse, so I'm ready to stop talking.
All right, well, let's stop talking, Randall, until next time.
We will. All right. Adios.
Adios.